Hello, this is Justice Backstrom, and welcome back to another video. So, about a month ago, I saw this video that I'm sure most of you have seen by now, of this guy ranking the letters of the alphabet by how easy it is to capitalize them in post. For example, you write a lowercase a, how easy it is to change it into a capital A. And that kind of gave me the idea to rank the numbers based on how easy it is to change them to all the other numbers. Just some quick ground rules for this. Some of these numbers, there are different ways to spell them, to write them, draw them, whatever. In those cases, I will mention the alternate ways, but I'll only rank them based on how I spell them, draw them, whatever. Starting with 0, changing 0 to a 1. Changing 0 into a 1 is basically impossible. You just kind of have to scribble the entire thing out like that. So no points there. Changing 0 into a 2, depending on how you write your 2s, you can kind of do like that, but it makes like a giant monster 2. Again, depending on how big you drew your 0, but yeah, that's kind of ugly. Changing 0 into a 3, again, you can kind of, this one's, you kind of just gotta draw the 3 over it. It doesn't really work. Changing 0 into a 4, you might be able to get away with like keeping some of those lines, but again, it ends up kind of ugly. Changing 0 into a 5, you can kind of, yeah, there's not really much of anything you can do there. Again, if you make the 5 part bold, you can use some of the lines and then just have that ugly bit left over, but it's kind of awful. How about changing 0 into a 6? Changing 0 into a 6 is one that actually kind of works for it. It does make your 6 a little outsized, but it still kind of looks like a 6. Changing 0 into a 7. Yeah, don't make me laugh. That's just, you just have to bold that thing out and hope nobody wonders why. But changing 0 into an 8. Changing 0 into an 8 is actually one of the easiest. And this might be, like, if you draw a little line in your 0, I don't actually know if that makes it easier or harder, because it kind of already looks like an 8, but then you still have, like, that little bit that's left over that's kind of weird looking. And lastly, changing 0 into a 9, another one that's really easy. Again, it makes your 0 look a little bit large, but it kind of works, or it makes your 9 look a little bit large. And again, for those of you that write the line through your 0, a lot of these would probably be different, but overall, 0 is a really rough one to get us started here. I'm not sure that it's D tier, but I'm gonna put 0 in C tier. It's really rough. Alright, next we're gonna go to 1, and 1's gonna be the one that a lot changes depending on how you write it. Changing 1 into a 0, first of all, fairly trivial, especially if you just write your 1s like a line, which bothers me on so many levels. Like, what is that? Honestly, it's just a line. It doesn't look like it does. That's not a 1. That's just a line. That looks like a lowercase L. The fact that there are people out there who think it's acceptable to write a 1, a lowercase L, and a capital I the exact same way, all three of them, drive me insane. Make that thing look like a 1, okay? Okay. Anyways, though, changing 0 into a 2, or as I was, changing 1 into a 2, fairly trivial, actually. It's never going to look exactly like it should, but you can look at that, you can say that's a 2. And if you wanna bold it out a little bit more, you can kind of make it look even more like a 2. Changing 1 into a 3, again, not too terrible. Again, it doesn't look great, but you can see that's a 3. Changing 1 into a 4, especially if you don't write on the line, which I never write on the line because I'm stupid, but it kind of helps in this case. Changing 0 into a 4 is one of the best ones, in my opinion. Like, you're already at the basis of the 4, you just need to finish it. Changing 1 into a 5, and I did accidentally draw that like that, but it helps with what I'm going to do, because I'm just going to do that. If it was a full size 1, that 5 would look a little bit outsized. And again, to be fair, suppose I had drawn those bits a little too large, it would look obvious that it wasn't originally a 5, but it's fine. It's not terrible. There's problems with it, but it's not terrible. Changing 1 into a 6. Again, and you could draw that bubble. You could draw that bubble on that side. Let me just fix that real quick. Yeah, you could draw that bubble on the bottom, or on the top, I guess. And your 1 into a 6, not too terrible. Turning 1 into a 7, you can kind of make it work. That is one where I'll be like, 7s are supposed to be slanted, alright? Your 1 is vertical, your 7's supposed to be slanted, and even though that little angle of the triangle bit there is kind of the same angle, they're both facing the wrong way. So your 7's going to look a little bit ugly. Still 1's doing a lot better than everything up here on the 0s, but that one is kind of or that 1 to 7 is kind of ugly. Turning a 1 into an 8, you can kind of make it work. It's going to look a bit wonky, but that's an 8. Turning 1 into a 9, and this is again another one where your straight line people are gonna see some benefit, but not too much actually, because that's still a very 9 looking 9. And you know, I'm tempted to put 1 in S tier, considering it may end up being our only S tier if I don't, or we may not end up having any S tiers if I don't. Some of those were kind of scummy, but I think that's about as good as you can get, so I'm going to put 1 in S tier, and you can fight me in the comments if you want, I don't freaking care. Moving on to 2s. Turning a 2 into a 0, it's going to have that little tail, it's going to look almost like a Q, and it's not terrible though. Turning 2 into a 1, you kind of have to do that type of 1, and it's still gonna look ugly, and it looks like a 1, but you just bolded over it. Turning 2 into a 3. Turning 2 into a 3, let me tell you what you gotta do. boom, it's a 3. Not ideal. And this one is actually one that works either way you spell 2, either way you draw 2, and that is a terrible 2. But again, point is, it turns into a 3 just as easily. Turning 2 into a 3, yeah, it's going to be a bit large for the line, but it's fine. Turning 2 into a 4, again, this is one where you can kind of use some of the lines. It's going to look a bit wonky. You can tell that you wrote something over it, but at least the lines sort of match up, so it doesn't look terrible. Turning a 2 into a 5. Now, you could kind of do like a little bit of a fancy 5 where you didn't like that. It's still going to look like, it actually kind of looks like 25. And if you want to avoid that kind of confusion, you're just going to have to bold that out. And also, it's a monster. It's huge now. Turning 2 into a 6. Can you turn 2 into a 6? No, you just gotta bold that thing out. Turning 2 into a 6 is ugly. Turning 2 into a 7. Turning 2 into a 7, you can kind of do a fancy 7, except it actually looks like a 7. Yeah, it's just like a little fancy 7 there. You might want to bold it out a little bit to make your curved lines from the 2 look like your straight lines from the 7. But it's not terrible. What about turning 2 into an 8?
Okay, so for some reason I actually really struggled with turning 2 into an 8 the first time, but turning 2 into an 8 is actually fairly trivial, as you see here.
Turning 2 into a 9. Could you just do that? Yeah, I mean, now it looks like a 9. It looks like an ugly 9, and it's going to dip below that line again. But it looks like a 9-ish. This... I'm going to have to put this in the same tier as 0. That's another C tier. 3. Turning 3 into a 0. This is one where you might want to just do that little line. But either way, you're going to have to bold that thing out, with or without the line. Turning 3 into a 1. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Turning 3 into a 2. Let's see. Does this one actually work both ways? I don't know if I've ever... I guess it kind of works both ways. It's kind of ugly. And that part is a bit bigger than you usually want for a 2. But it's not the worst I've ever seen. Turning a 3 into a 4. Yeah, you're just going to have to bold that thing out. That really isn't going to work out for you very well. Turning a 3 into a 5. At least you've got this bit for the 5. But that's about it. That part is still going to look ugly. Yeah, you're turning a 3 into a 5. The one thing it has going for it over turning the 2 into the 5 is you're not going to be too big for your line anymore. It's just going to be ugly though. Turning a 3 into a 6. What? You can do like that and it'll look ugly. It's the right size for the line though. It's got something for it. And now turning a 3 into a 7. Again, weirdly kind of works, I think. It's bold, and you know, now that I see it, I don't like it that much. So yeah, no. But finally cutting some slack for Mr. 3. We have turning a 3 into an 8, and guess what? you have the easiest job ever. That is an actually beautiful. This right here is possibly the best transformation that we're going to see on this list. And this might save R3 from D tier, but not to dwell on that for too long. You still have to turn a 3 into a 9, and if you do your 9s like this, which I can never get the hang of without it looking like a G, but if you do your 9s like that, it almost works. Again, I'm going to rank them based on how I draw my numbers though. So turning that 3 into a 9, you're going to have a monster 9, and you might have to bold it out. So we've got one good thing, and as beautiful as that 8 is, I don't think it's enough to save 3 from D tier, because that is a single number on this list that looks decent. Actually good. 3 to 8 looks good. Anyways, moving on to 4. How do you turn 4 into a 0? And there's another one where you can draw your 4s different ways, but I don't know if it's really going to help out 4 in this. You're just going to have to bold that out if you're trying to turn a 4 into a 0. Turning a 4 into a 1, this one does not really work both ways. Yeah, that's not going to work. That still looks like a 4. You're going to really have to bold that thing out if you want it to look like a 1. Turning a 4 into a 2. No, it doesn't work. You just have to bold it out. And turning a 4 into a 3. Turning a 4 into a 3, I don't think is as bad as the other ones, because you can kind of almost use some of those lines. You're going to have to bold it out a little bit, but it won't look, at least it'll look like what you want it to after you bold it out. Turning a 4 into a 5. Brother, I've done like this in the past, but no, that doesn't really work. You just kind of have to bold the whole thing out, and it's going to look ugly. Turning a 4 into a 6. I've done this in the past, but again, that looks ugly. Turning a 4 into a 7. You know what? You know the drill at this point. It's just gonna look ugly, and it'll never really look like what you wanted it to. Turning into a 4, or turning into a 4. What am I on about? Turning a 4 into an 8. This one isn't terrible. You can just kind of do like that, and it's wonky and a bit straighter lines, sharper edges than you usually want on your 4s, but it's not the worst thing I've ever seen. Turning your 4 into a 9, you can kind of do that. You're gonna have to bold it out a bit, but it's not the worst. Anyways, that makes 4 an easy D tier, and I only did as far as D tier because we're only ranking 10 things, but if there was an F tier, that would be an F tier. Go ahead and do 5. How do you turn 5 into a 0 without it looking like an 8? You don't. It's just not gonna look right. Turning a 5 into a 1. You know the drill at this point. It's bolding out time, boys. Yeah, that looks terrible. Turning a 5 into a 2. No? How about this? Still no? Alright. I'm sure to win you over with this one. There we go. Yeah, buddy. How about that, eh? Still no? There you go. Okay. Moving on, turning a 5 into a 3. You've got the same thing you had 3 to 5, where this is going to kind of work for you, but the rest of it really isn't. I think with 3 you have a little bit more. And as I try to do this, I realize I may be a little bit too optimist. That kind of looks like a 3 now. If you want to say it looks like a 3, then I'll say it looks like a 3. But yeah, that's a terrible, ugly 3. Turning a 5 into a 6. This one might single-handedly save 6 from, or 5 from the D tier, although I kind of doubt it. But turning a 5 into a 6. Boom. Beautiful. Kind of. Turning a 5, I skipped 4, didn't I? Yeah, I skipped 4. Well, you still have to turn the 5 into a 4, and that's gonna put it right back in D tier. Because what is that? That is just awful. Excuse the fact that I just forgot how to count. Right, we're gonna go right on ahead into turning a 5 into a 7. You can use that line and that line and make your 7 like that, but not really. No, that's not a thing. That is an abomination. That's what that is. Now turning your 5 into an 8 is going to be relatively trivial. I mean, it kind of looks like a B. It actually definitely looks like a B. But you can do it better than that. Turning a 5 into an 8, it's whatever. Turning a 5 into a 9, this is another case where you might want to try out doing whatever this kind of 9 is. And you can see why it looks like a G when I write it like that. But again, ranking them based off how I draw my numbers, turning a 5 into a 9 is just not gonna work. It's just not gonna work. And yeah, 5 is an easy D tier. Wow, that's 3 in a row straight D tiers. Alright, go ahead and move on to 6. Turning a 6 into a 0. This is one where you might try to adopt that diagonal line just for one. It's still going to look kind of ugly, but again, ranking them based on how I draw my numbers, turning a 6 into a 0, not really going to work. It just kind of looks like an 8 now. Turning a 6 into a 1, you know the drill at this point. That is a very bold looking one right there. Turning a 6 into a 2. Turning a 6 into a 2. And I thought that might work, but it doesn't. It doesn't work. You cannot turn a 6 into a 2. It just doesn't. It just doesn't work. You're gonna have to bold that one out too. Alright, now turning a 6 into a 3. You could maybe almost do that, but again, it just doesn't really work. Now we get on to turning a 6 into a 4. Yep, turning a 6 into a 4 doesn't work. That's horrible. Turning a 6 into a 5, and this is one where we'll have to see if it works in reverse. You got your 6, and you got your 5? Maybe? Nope, it's just a weird looking 6. I mean, if you do it really bold and hope people ignore that little tail there, then you might say you've got a 5, but realistically, you're just going to have to bite the bullet, and that's your new 5. Turning a 6 into a 7. You could kind of play with it and make it look like that. And that's probably the best we're gonna get for 6s. Well, actually, no, I take that back, because next you have 8, and 8 kind of works with 6. It may look a little bit wonky, but that's the best you're gonna get, because turning a 6 into a 9, you could do like that, and you're gonna have a really big 9. Yeah, easy D tier. 7. Turning a 7 into a 0. You kinda got something, but it's not enough to make it look okay. That's the horrible 0. Turning a 7 into a 1. You kind of have the same problem turning a 1 into a 7. It's just it's there, but it's not really good. Turning a 7 into a 2. Now, if you got a really 7 looking 7, that 2 is gonna struggle to take shape, but it might not be the worst one on this list. And then turning a 7 into a 3, you could try to make it work, but that's gonna be a weird looking 3. Turning a 7 into a 4. What do you even have to work with here? Like, you could kind of try to do that, but wow, that is an ugly 4. Like, holy smoke. Somebody call the ugly police, because that 4 is ugly. Turning a 7 into a 5. You don't have anything to work with here. Now it looks like an 8. Oopsies. Try again. Oops, you wrote the freaking 7 again. Now you gotta draw. No, it's just 7 into a 5 doesn't work. Okay, and you're just gonna have to bold that thing out. That's your new 5. Congratulations, you're an idiot, and everybody knows it now. Turning a 7 into a 6 though. Does it work? Does it? Does it work? Does it work? Does it? No, it doesn't. It doesn't really work. Turning your 7 into an 8. 8's gonna help us a lot, but it's not gonna get any help when it comes to 8's turn, because turning that 7 into that 8, not so bad, not terrible. Turning a 7 into a 9. This might be one of those cases where you want to adopt that G looking 9, but it's not gonna turn out. And again, based on how I rank them, or based on how I draw them, that 7 and a 9 is not that easy D tier. There's a lot of D tiers. I wonder if we're gonna get any A or B tiers. Holy smoke. We got 8. Turning 8 into a 0. Bold it out. Bold it out and hope nobody wonders why. Turning an 8 into a 1. Yeah, don't make me laugh. That's another bolded out one. Turning an 8 into a 2. I am not very imaginative, am I? That is a beautiful looking, very bold 2. Turning an 8 into a 3. 3 gave us a lot of help going the other way, but let's see. Nope, we got nothing. That is just gonna be a very bold looking 3 right there. That is not gonna work. Turning an 8 into a 4. You guys know the drill. I'm just gonna run through them all real quick and let y'all see why none of these work. Because 8, like if you just think about how 8 looks on an analog clock, 8 already uses all the analog segments. You can't take them away as easily as you can give them out. So unfortunately for 8, even though 8 was probably the most helpful to everyone else, nobody wants to help 8 back. And then turning that 8 into a 9. also not going to work. Poor 8. Nobody wants to help out 8. Nobody. And I'm realizing that this tier list isn't working. I might have to rearrange it because 8 is F tier. Now going on to 9. Turning a 9 into a 0. You might want to adopt that little diagonal line. But yeah, it's not really going to work, is it? You're just going to have to... Oops, I wrote that wrong. You're just going to have to bold that thing out. Turning a 9 into a 1. You can kind of turn a 9 into a 1. You just have to make that part bold. And then you kind of have to make the whole thing bold to make it match, so it doesn't really work. But at least you're not going larger than the line anymore. Turning a 9 into a 2. Not really going to work. Like that, what even is that? It looks like a baseball. See, look, baseball. Maybe, I don't know. Turning a 9 into a 3. Yay, that's beautiful. Not really so much. Turning a 9 into a 4. You can kind of use that part, and then it's an ugly 4. That's not the worst here. But turning a 9 into a 5. Turning 9 to 5. I'm sorry about that. That almost works. Not really. Turning a 9 into a 6. What are you going to do with that? You're not going to do anything with that. You're just going to do that. And then you've got an ugly 6. And then turning a 9 into a 7. Turning a 9 into a 7, you kind of... Beautiful. Awesome. Beautiful 7 there. And last but not least, you're turning a 9 into an 8. Once again, 8 here to save the day. There's a couple of ways you can do that, and this one might again look better if you do your 9s like this, because you can kind of do that. It's not the most beautiful 8 you've ever seen, but it's not the worst either. Again, 9 is just very crummy, and I'm gonna have to rearrange this tier list, so I'll do that now. Anyways, though, that's going to be the end of this video. I want to thank you very much for watching, and I will see you later. Bye.